Welcome to Statistically Speaking. This is a video series where we talk about why we should care about statistics in B2B research. I am Sara Boostani. I am a marketing research analyst at 6 Sense, and I am joined by my co-host and partner in all things research at 6 Sense, Kerry Cunningham. Hey, Kerry.
Hey, Sara. How are you?
So in today's episode, we will be talking about the purpose of descriptive and inferential statistics, sampling populations, and we'll be talking about hypothesis testing.
I think really important thing about this is we see all the time reports published with what we're going to describe as descriptive statistics. And we see people making inferences about what they mean. And most of the time, unless you have inferential statistics supporting those inferences, you shouldn't. And even when it seems really obvious, you probably shouldn't. So we'll talk about why.
Yeah, I think that will become really clear in this episode, and exactly a lot of the benchmarks and reports that we read in statistics really stop at the descriptive level, and we'll talk about why we should be going beyond that. So, descriptive statistics summarizes and describes characteristics of a sample that we collected. Inferential statistics makes inferences or asks questions about the entire population of the sample that we pulled from. So we can quite simply just think of descriptive statistics as within a sample and inferential statistics going beyond that sample. So we can rarely measure everyone, right? If we are interested in measuring B2B marketers, for example, there are a lot of B2B marketers out there that would be very expensive to measure everyone and quite frankly impossible, right? Not everyone can participate in our research that we want to conduct or is available. So what we do instead is we sample them, right? And every time we read a benchmark report or a study, we are reading often about samples. Someone has taken a sample of that population that they're interested in, and they're reporting on characteristics of that specific sample.
And again, this is true of everything that we read. You know, the things we see in the news. How do people feel about the economy? Who's ahead of who in the polls and surveys? They're all samples where we're trying to generalize from what the sample said to the rest of the population.
Exactly. So we can think of, again, descriptive statistics. We are describing just the people that we talk to, right? How many people were involved? What was the average for that group of people? Last episode, we talked about being able to measure how much variability there is in things. We can take, basic measurements of how much answers varied for that sample of people. But right now, we can't say anything beyond this, right? Just for that set of people. Inferential statistics is where we're able to use the sample that we collected and start asking questions about the broader population. So if I found a difference in my sample, is that also true of the larger population?
Generalize is a term that you hear a lot. Can you generalize from the sample to the population?
Totally. So a main branch of inferential statistics where we're generalizing beyond our sample is hypothesis testing. And the way that we look at that is we assume that there's no effect. So just like in our justice system in the US, we assume that someone is innocent until proven guilty, until we have enough evidence to say that there is an effect happening, we assume that there's not one. And that's just how we ask questions and test theories in stats.
That's right. So, the onus is on the prosecutor to prove that the defendant is guilty. The onus is on the experimenter or the researcher to prove that the thing that researcher thinks is true actually is. And, the bar can be higher or lower. We're going to talk about that in future episodes also. How do we determine what the level of proof that's required is? But that's really what it is. And Sara said the term null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. It makes sense when you are familiar with the terms and all. We don't have to worry about those. It's really just assume that the thing that you're looking at doesn't matter. And what you're trying to see is there enough evidence to say that it does? To say that there's a difference between the groups that's real, or to say that if we make a change in some program that it will cause a difference. That's what we're looking for. And the safety is always to avoid confirmation bias and assume that it doesn't and require a lot of proof.
That's exactly right. So if we return to an example that we looked at in the last episode where Kerry and I did a research study to measure how much are marketers being paid in B2B. This is just simple descriptive from that study. We sampled the population of B2B marketers in North America, and 515 marketers participated. And the mean for that particular, or the average, I should say, for that particular sample was about 170,000. But right now, at this point, I'm not going to go say, hey, this is true for the entire population, because right now, all we have done is describe, right? We haven't done any statistics to ask questions about whether the way pay moves in our sample is also the way it moves in the broader population.
And we wouldn't say based on that we think all marketers that you go ask will have a salary of $172,935. Right? There are a lot of factors that would influence that. And you can see just in the descriptive statistics that the minimum one we measured was 30,000, the max was 450. That's a big range. And so ultimately we want to understand what's causing that. But right now, all we know is that's the average, that's the range.
Exactly. So if we want to ask other questions like, is pay different between marketers who work remotely, in person, hybrid? Does that differ in the broader population of marketers? Does the pay differ by marketing discipline, by gender? This is when we use our sample to ask questions like that about the broader population of marketers. So when we do write a report or a benchmark, we can confidently say, and there's specific confidence levels that we can have in statistics that we'll talk about later, but we can say with a certain amount of confidence that whatever result we found does likely reflect the broader population, or maybe it doesn't.
Or under what circumstances does it? So your sample might very adequately represent the population of marketers in SaaS or in North America, but not in manufacturing or in Europe, right? And so we always want to be cognizant of those things. As a researcher, it's your duty to tell your audience what are the limitations, what are the confines within which this can be generalized. But that's where what we're going to talk about next comes into play.
That's exactly right. When you are building your study, you have to be very specific about the people and the population that you are sampling, so you don't make generalizations about people that you maybe didn't sample. So again, just to hit home here, the way that we look at questions in statistics, the way that we test our hypotheses is that all the questions that we asked on the last slide, is pay different between people who work remotely and people who work in person? We always just assume no, right? The assumption is no until we have enough evidence to state otherwise. So descriptive statistics is where we just describe simply the sample that we collected. Inferential statistics allows us to go beyond that and start asking questions about the broader population. Unfortunately, a lot of the benchmarks and research studies that are available in B2B stop at descriptive statistics. If they are not reporting any kind of stats, it's probably the case that they are not doing them. So we want to look for these things. Did they do the math to understand whether the trends that they're saying for this sample of people represent everyone else? It's really important that we look for those indicators in the reports that we read.
And we see that all the time. So we really frequently see in reports that are published that a score of 33 is the leader and a score of 32 is in second place on a sample of 150 people. Well, on a sample of 150 people, it's possible that those are statistically reliably different from one another and that you would expect to see that in the population. But actually, it's not too likely. It's likely that those things are not different. And what we would say is we can't say that they're different because we don't have enough evidence yet. But you can only say that if you've done the inferential stats, and we're going to talk a lot more about what they are. For now, it's just that there's descriptive, and that tells you what the researchers found, and there's this other stuff that tells you whether you can really rely on those findings representing the populations we're talking about, representing the things that the real world as it is. And that's really everything that matters about reading these reports, is understanding whether it actually represents the real world.
A number of times throughout this episode, we have been talking about needing enough evidence to support that there is a real effect or a real difference in the larger population. And we're going to be diving into the deeper end of the pool on inferential statistics in the next episode.
Yeah. I suspect that there are some people who see this and are like, oh yeah, can't wait. I remember that. Want to know more. And there are also people who are looking at them and went, oh God, maybe that's enough of this video series. We're going to start talking about technical stuff. We are going to talk about the technical stuff, but we're going to absolutely minimize the use of the technical terms because they're not useful or necessary or helpful unless you're really getting into it. So this next episode will be about how do we know whether there's enough evidence to conclude that what we just saw in the sample survey, whatever we just did, actually matches the real world. And that's what it's about. And there's some technical things that you have to do, tests you have to do, but we can talk about them without a lot of the technical terms, and the concepts are actually really straightforward. So that's what we'll do in the next episode.
Thank you.